Yo, I'm Brendan. We need a place to put our cash that gets us a good return, pretty safe, it's actually worth using. And at this rate, the Fed is lowering rates more and more as time goes on, or at least that's the plan what's going to happen. And so if that continues, when it continues, our high yield savings accounts and checking accounts are going to be almost literally worthless. Like we're going to go back to the days potentially of 1% interest or 0.5% interest on our savings. And that's not a wise way for us to store our cash because it's going to get destroyed by inflation, especially lately with inflation being upwards of 3, 4, 5, 6%. If your cash is only making you 1% or 2%, that means you're actively losing money. And today I found out about another option that I didn't know existed. Thanks to this person on YouTube named Noble Chief for the idea to make this video. I've never before now heard of a Wealthfront bond ladder. I've checked it out, and so today I'm going to share with you the features of it, what are the fees behind it, like how much does it cost to use, because that oftentimes is a deal breaker for me, and overall, is this worth using? Is it a product that does something unique and adds value to our life in a way that we couldn't really do it otherwise? Let's find out. So whenever you look at the Wealthfront bond ladder, this is the screen that you're presented with. It says that it's automated, that you get around 4.5% interest, and that there's no fees for the first 6 months. So already that tells me a bunch of stuff. Automated means I generally will like it because I don't want to have to be the one manually doing stuff. 4.5% interest is pretty darn good. And no fees for the first 6 months sounds good, but that also tells me there's fees. So, catch-22. We'll come back to that one. And it looks like the big headline feature here is earn more on your cash with 0 state taxes, which of course is a thing that happens whenever we use U.S. Treasuries, that if you have a state with really high taxes, cough, California, cough, cough, then this could be really great for you because you're going to save a little bit of money in terms of taxes that way. And I was just going to say, I'd be curious to know how much difference that actually makes because I think for most of us, this isn't actually a feature. For a handful of states, there's actually 0% state taxes. So that for sure is not a value add for you. But even for somebody like me who lives in Arizona, it's not a huge figure. So let's just say, for example, we'll use a little calculator here with this very awkward presidential gold bar Pez dispenser. What is that thing doing? I don't know what that's doing. Let's say we want a ladder duration of 4 years and I live in Arizona. We'll say the annual income is 100 grand, married filing jointly. Show me the difference here. So the gain that I would have to get if I was getting fully taxed interest that's not a treasury interest is 3.96 versus 3.9 for treasury. The difference is only 0.06%. It's not a huge difference. This is not a deal breaker or deal maker for me. It says right here, your state income tax is 2.5%. And even then you could pay up to 2.5% because I'm sure depending on the rest of your tax situation, maybe you don't even pay that. Let's do an example in California just to see here because I imagine that's got to be the worst, right? Okay, there we go. 4.15 versus 3.90. Maybe 0.25% is enough for this to make it justifiable for you. I could see that potentially. And we'll come back around to that same number, that 0.25%, so stay tuned. And the way that they structure this is basically like you would expect if you're familiar with that term of a financial ladder. I think the more often referenced thing is a CD ladder, and that's where you'd buy a series of CDs that are in differing durations, in different terms. So let's say you had $50,000 in cash. You could buy 5 different CDs that all had 5 different time spans on them. And so you could buy one that's like a 6-month CD. You could buy one that's a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year, and a 4 year. And then that way, as each one matures, you buy another one and keep extending that out. And you're kind of building this ladder out, if you will. And the reason you would do that is to maximize the amount of return that you could get and to have relatively easy access to the funds. Like sometimes you can pull that money out early, but sometimes you can't. And so having a portion of that money come mature and be available to you then gives you the option of spending the money if you need it or whatever. From what their website is telling me, it looks like they're doing something very similar. So they're saying an automated bond ladder is designed to weather changing interest rates by spreading your investment across different U.S. Treasuries with different maturities. And of course, because it's this kind of treasury, it's not investing in the stock market. It's not a fancy, very high risk, high reward kind of scenario. We're having very low risk. And here's the potentially first interesting feature that actually draws me to this more than if I just did it on my own or more than other products is easy to access funds. It says we can do that with no penalties and no hassles. And then we can also automatically withdraw monthly interest and principal, which is pretty cool. And you can also set a target withdrawal date or keep reinvesting. But I think for a lot of these things, something that hangs up most people from using them, this is my complete opinion, I have no data about this, is just the lack of ability to actually access the funds. Yeah, it sounds nice to lock in a 4.5% interest rate for 3 years with a CD or something, but what if I need that money? Do I have to pay a fee? How big is the fee? How bad is that going to hurt? And then that whole mental game kind of slows you down and you think, well, it's just not worth it then. I would rather risk losing a little bit of money in interest, but have that money remain liquid this whole time so I can access it and do whatever I want to with my life. I don't want to have to mess with the headache of the money not being accessible. Well, somehow they found out a way to make this very accessible and give you those kinds of options for withdrawal. So that's pretty cool. And they give us a nice little visual representation of what I expect to happen, which is interest rates continue to drop as the Fed lowers rates. But the goal with a bond ladder or a CD ladder or any number of different kind of strategies to maintain a cash earning interest rate that's decent is to create a gap here. I want my cash to be up here earning, 4%, while the rest of the world is only earning 1 or 2%. And then this little cute diagram really answers one of the questions for us, which is, could I just do this on my own? Why can't I do this through a different investing brokerage that doesn't charge me any kind of fee, build my own bond ladder, make all this happen for myself, and save myself the headache and the fee of having to go through them? And they show us a really cute little diagram here that basically says, we're doing the work for you. We're going to go through them, filter them out, and match up what you say your goal is to the right bond that's going to accomplish that goal, and have a series of them to do that. Is this totally far beyond what you could do with a little bit of research to say, all right, well, I want this money to be for sure accessible in 2 years. How good of a situation can I set up for myself between now and 2 years from now? Maybe I'll look at 6 month, 1 year, and 2 year bonds, and I put this percentage of my money in this one, that percentage in that one, and the last percentage in the final one, and then you kind of hope you did it right. Well, this kind of takes away that guesswork. Now, do we totally trust them that they're doing everything in our best interest? I don't know. But we have to pay for the convenience, right? If you don't want to go through that headache and that lack of sureness, then we pay somebody to do it for us. Of course, they've got a little risk warning here, and I love this little visual. Your savings account has no risk, no volatility, no real changing in your account balance potential. U.S. Treasuries technically have a little bit of risk. Index funds have a significant amount more, and then individual stocks are way more risky. And here's a screen that I've been wanting to show you this whole time, because this is like an apples to apples side-by-side comparison between this bond ladder and other options. I just recently made a video about the public bond account, and so I was interested to see what this would kind of compare to that, because I think that's a fairly compelling product, but it's curious to me that this is so similar, coming out in another similar time frame, but there's really distinct differences between the Wealthfront automated bond ladder and the public bond account. And so I'm curious to kind of compare these. I think this is an unfair comparison to say that they're going to give you this very distinct, well-defined yield for theirs, and CDs and corporate bonds are like undefined. Okay, of course they're undefined. Variable depending on duration. Well, so is the bond ladder, but just because they're picking their 3-month ladder and giving us the highest rates, it makes them look good. Come on, guys. I totally agree with this risk assessment that all 3 of these are very low risk, and then a corporate bond risk is definitely higher. I mean, the corporation needs to come through on the promise, basically, so I think that's fairly accurate. The insurance assessment, I think, is also accurate, that as long as the corporate bonds are held in a brokerage account, then you typically have SIPC insurance. This bond ladder with Wealthfront does have SIPC insurance, and then both CDs and savings accounts have FDIC insurance. The difference there is that the Wealthfront setup and the corporate bond setup are both brokerage based, they're investing based, hence the SIPC insurance, where the other two are banking products, hence FDIC insurance. Nerdy stuff there, but it's good to know that they both are technically insured. As we learned from the Yotta Savings debacle, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be free from problems, because there could be other problems outside of the jurisdiction of SIPC or FDIC. That means you could still not have your money, but that's kind of a different discussion for a different day. Or you can go back and watch my Yotta videos. Liquidity, I think, is a huge hang up for people, so it's great that you can have no fees for early withdrawals, both here and with corporate bonds. Obviously, your savings account is fully liquid, and then oftentimes CDs do have fees or penalties for early withdrawal. So I would say that's the biggest downside to CDs, is just that early withdrawal penalty situation. And there are those out there that don't have penalties. Like we we put our money into Ally Bank, no fee, no penalty CDs back in the day. They were like an 11-month term, good interest rate, and there's no penalty. So you could withdraw it at any time, no problem. And to me, that was like the best of both worlds. So you could look for those, but I'd say most of them are not that way, if I had to guess. Now we can compare fees, because to me, the fee is a big part of this. Annual 0.25% fee, but for the first 6 months, it's waived essentially. And we're going to dive into the fine print of this so I can answer kind of all the questions you might have about it. So far, the fee is not that bad. I mean, the Wealthfront fee typically is 0.25%, so they're in line with their regular fee. I don't think that this is exorbitant or egregious or too greedy or anything. It's fine. Part of what I think is appealing about the public bond account is the fact that it's got a lower fee than this. Or at least for most people, it should be a lower fee than this, because the way that fee is structured is you've got a monthly account fee of $4 per month, which is very, very low, especially if you've got many thousands of dollars in here. I love that it's a flat fee, not a percentage fee like Wealthfront. And then also you've got a 5 basis point markup for purchases and sales. And so if for some oddball reason you're like, I'm going to day trade my bond account, or I need to put money in and take money out a whole bunch of times, it's a pretty small fee still, 5 basis points, but they're going to knock you down for that. I think the goal with any of these is try and set up defined start and end points as much as you can fathom and then leave it alone. And so if you're doing that, you're not going to get hit with hardly any fees from Public, unlike the one from Wealthfront where you're getting hit with 0.25% all the time. You can't really see it, but I'll do a screenshot so you can see it. The other really amazing feature with the bond account is that right now they're saying it's a 6.8% yield locked in. So you're earning 2.3% higher than you are with Wealthfront. I mean, that's a pretty massive difference. Granted, you're accepting a higher level of risk because if we remember, the bond account is part corporate bonds, part US Treasury bonds. So they kind of mix them in together to pump up that return, and you're also pumping up the risk a little bit. So it's cool that there's both these products out there. If you want to be a little bit less risky and you're okay with the bigger fee, you can go with Wealthfront. If you're a little bit okay with risk and you don't want a big fee at all, like you want to keep all of your profit basically, you can go towards Public, or you can do it all on your own. But as there always seems to be with these kinds of things, there are more details. There's another shoe that has to drop, or at least there's more things you need to know in terms of details. So let's check out the terms and conditions, because I want you to know, number one, about a minimum deposit requirement that Wealthfront has, which is $500 for the initial deposit and $100 for any additional deposits on top of that. I think the reason they do this is because they're charging a percentage fee. And if you're not putting at least that much money in there, it's not worth them going through the work of hosting your account. And so you got less than $500, go somewhere else. That's what they're saying. They confirm you can withdraw money at any time. It takes 2 to 3 days, but that's pretty typical, I would say, for banking products. Significantly with either of these products, with any kind of bond situation, if you're not taking that bond out to its full term, whatever that is for the particular product we're talking about, then you're missing out on gains. And I think you could potentially even lose money. So you really need to be sure that this money isn't going to be accessed for a while, or you've got to be okay with lowering your overall returns. I just want to put that out there so you're aware of it. There aren't fees for withdrawing early, which is great. And then here's a very logical question. Well, what if you just had a portfolio that you invested in that had bonds in it? How is that different than this product, which is a bond ladder? And it's really just two slightly different takes on a similar kind of objective. The bond ladder is about preserving your capital and earning some interest from the treasuries. The bond portfolio is you investing in bonds that are meant to protect your principal, but it's also higher risk than the bond ladder. So they say right here, most bond ETFs do not hold bonds to maturity and hence are not aimed to preserve capital. However, if you're okay with a little more risk, there's a potential to earn more. So it's super similar. It's just that the bond ladder is meant for people who want as little risk as possible, essentially, but don't want to keep their money in a savings account. And the automated bond portfolio is better for little bit higher risk. I mean, these are just like different shades of gray along the path. There's still cash is way down here, like no risk, then the bond ladder, then a bond portfolio, then index funds. So we're still like well below index funds in terms of risk. It's very, very safe stuff. I think one of the big questions that I really have that's still lingering about this though is how sure are we about that return? Because they say that they're going to have different bonds that span out different amounts of time and all that jazz. But they also showed in that previous diagram the bond rate or your return rate dropping over time. And so they're expecting that. You need to also expect that if you're going to use a product like this. You know, what they say here in these extra little terms and conditions is that they're going to use a laddering strategy that structures rungs spaced 1 month apart. And then you can lengthen those out. These are the durations of each individual bond that you're investing in. And then you can also customize that between 1 month and 6 years according to individual investment goals. And so they're advertising us a 4.5% interest rate here. But I think what it really comes down to is depending on how you configure it, you're going to either be taken for a ride that goes down, or you will be able to technically lock this in for potentially years, but it's how you set it up. So if you pick something like a really short-term duration, like 6 months, well, yeah, you're going to get 4.6% or something like that because the bonds are still yielding a high rate. But if it's only maturing and then reinvesting itself in like 1 month increments, which maybe is the default for a short time span like that, then they're also more subject to taking a dive whenever the Fed lowers rates. So if you know that you want to lock this in for a long time period, you need to do that up front. You need to lock in that bond rate now by buying them that have durations that are in the years, not in the months. You got to get 3, 4, 5 year long ones so that you can secure that rate and then don't take the money out or else you compromise your return. So I know it's kind of a tricky thing to do. It feels a lot like a CD at that point, but I think that's what's happening beneath the surface here, that they're not really upfront about saying. They kind of want you to just think you're going to get 4.5%. All right, let me sign up. It's not quite that exact. So knowing what we know, now that we've been through all of this, is this worth using? Is it better or worse than the public bond account? I think this is a little bit like saying, what's the best sports car? Do you want something like a Corvette, some mid-engine, automatic transmission, V8 powered, aggressive but comfortable sports car made by Americans? Or are you okay spending twice as much money to get something like a 911 with the same or less horsepower, but higher levels of engineering, rear engine, rear drive, and your choice of different transmissions and totally different feels. Or you think something like a front engine turbo V6 sounds interesting, something like a Nissan Z. The point is, I could go on for forever, but the point I'm trying to make here is there's not like a perfect right answer. There's not one product that stands above everything else over and above as the absolute best way for us to put our cash, because what you want and the qualities that you're looking for in this product are different than what I want. Your time frames are different. Your constraints, your concerns, all that stuff is different. If you're 23 and you're saving for your first house and you know that you're not going to buy the house for at least 5 years, maybe you could lock something in like this. That could be handy. But if you're 68 and you're sitting on $1 million in cash and you know that your high yield savings account is going to be going down in interest soon, well, what does that look like to you? How much interest could this kick off? Is that enough for you? How often do you want to have to reassess your cash situation and then try and either find another savings product that gives you a decent return 3, 4, 5 years from now? Are you okay with that rate dropping? What would you do if the interest rate went to 2% tomorrow? And in both situations, if you are looking out years into the future, 5, 10 years, why not invest the money? I'm a big fan of investing, obviously, talk about it all the time. But if you want to have a chance to make the most gains, then investing is clearly the answer. So I think this is a highly personal question of whether or not this is right for you, if this works for you. I think you've got to read this a little bit for yourself to decide. I think it's a very decent product. I think it's a little bit less risk than the public one, a little bit less return. It gives you an option to potentially lock in rates that give you a tax break and are potentially more flexible than a CD. So I see it more as kind of a CD ladder alternative. That's the way I look at this. If you were looking into CD ladders anyway, maybe this is worth considering also in that mix and deciding between a CD ladder or this. I don't see it as a competitor for investing. I don't see it necessarily as a competitor for a checking account or savings account. It's just too complicated. The money is still a little bit less liquid than those. And of course, they're going to be taken for a ride when the Fed dives rates down, and this won't as much. But what do you think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Tell me the truth. Leave me a comment with either love or hate in it if you watched till the end of the video and you saw this, because this is the secret comment word. And to all my members, I appreciate you so much for supporting me every week. Also, members, leave me a comment if you want something in particular from your membership, not just an occasional behind the scenes video. And there's members only videos that only you can see if you look back in the YouTube back catalog of videos. If you want a special members only video or live stream, then let me know in a comment. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I'll see you later. Bye.